somebody's daddy, always laid out on the street, and for what? We on the street, and for what? Your precious lethal fear. Your precious lethal fear. You could change your hood just by showing your face. Condo climbing high, now the black is erased. You clutch on your purse, now you crossing the street. Brother caught your eye, now you calling police. It's a casual violence in your speech and your silence. It's a natural science, you too comfortable life. We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning brighter every day. We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning brighter every day. You don't know anything about a story, tell it wrong all the time. Don't know a thing about it, glory, wanna steal my favorite show. My friends think I should love you anyway. My friend James says I should love you anyway. That's okay. Ooh, yeah, you're making it hard for me. Ooh, you're making it so hard. My friend James says I should love you We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning brighter every day. We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning brighter every day. We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning brighter every day. We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning brighter. We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning brighter every day. We don't go out, can't wish us away. We've been burning.
Good evening. I'm Kimberly Crenshaw, Executive Director of the African American Policy Forum. Together with the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies, we welcome you to this year's Her Dream Deferred, a week on the status of Black women. For the past 7 years, in honor of Women's History Month and the UN's International Decade for People of African Descent, AAPF has convened Her Dream Deferred during the last week of March to amplify the voices and stories of Black women and girls. The series serves to disrupt dominant and stereotypical narratives around Black women and our well-being. We aim not only to speak to the harms that Black women and girls face, inclusive of our differences in age, ability, class, sexuality, and gender performance, but also to hone the tools necessary to dismantle structural barriers that plague us in our homes, our schools, and in our communities. In 2022, in the face of relentless attacks on racial and gender equity across the United States, the need for us to continue to uplift the status of Black women so as to organize around specific policy interventions is more urgent than ever. This year, we are presenting a standout schedule of programming to do exactly that. We once again bring you our HHD Mini Film Festival, where we have curated a stellar lineup that includes screenings and talkbacks for the following films: On These Grounds, which you've just seen, Aftershock, which will be screened tomorrow, and In Our Mother's Garden, which will be screening on Friday. We'll also be hosting a labor of love, cultivating restorative spaces for women activists, healers, and caregivers. That's on Wednesday, and a community wellness activity at the end of the festival this coming Saturday. We hope that this week of activities opens up vital conversations about where Black women and girls are in this present moment and builds the necessary advocacy that centers and uplifts them. To register for her Dream Deferred events taking place this week, please visit our website, www.aapf.org, or check the link in our bio on all of our social media platforms. I'm now going to pass the mic on to Dr. Venus Evans-Winters, the research coordinator of Black Girls Initiatives at AAPF, who will be moderating a talkback for On These Grounds, the documentary we just watched. We hope you feel stimulated, activated, and inspired by this week's programming. Venus, passing it on to you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Hi, my name is Dr. Venus Evans-Winters. Most of you all know me as Dr. V, and I am the Black Girls Research Initiatives Coordinator here at AAPF. Today, I will be in discussion with Black sister extraordinaire, Ms. Vivian Anderson, and our younger sisters, Naya Kinney, along with Alexa Harmon Thomas. As the documentary powerfully illustrates, this is not simply a South Carolina problem. This is a national epidemic. Black girls in our schools are still subject to the twin vices which leave them over-policed and underprotected. Today, and as part of our Her Dream Deferred 2022, we are glad to be joined by some of the cast members of the film, as well as other experts and organizers to discuss ways in which we can make our schools and communities safer places for Black girls in order for them to learn, grow, and thrive. I am delighted to welcome our panelists to this discussion. So first, I'll do a brief introduction starting with Vivian Anderson. Vivian is the founder of Every Black Girl, or EBG. Her story and journey as an activist is represented in the film On These Grounds, which we just viewed today. The stated mission of Every Black Girl is to create a world where Black girls thrive. EBG supports Black girls who have been impacted by over-policing in schools, by providing access and resources so that they can move beyond that moment of trauma and the harm that they experienced. Not the one to shy away from the protection of Black girls, the International Documentary Association referred to Vivian in an interview as the On These Grounds accidental protagonist, a supporting character that was unwittingly made the star. Also joining us today is Naya Kinney. Naya is a former AAPF intern and Every Black Girl participant. Naya's story is captured in the On These Grounds documentary as the student behind the cell phone and a Black girl activist. Naya was a student at Spring Valley High School in Columbia, South Carolina, when she witnessed and filmed in the classroom the assault of a fellow Black girl classmate at the hands of a school resource officer. Naya was soon after, along with her classmate Shakara, arrested on disturbing school charges and taken to a detention center. Following the incident, Naya withdrew from Spring Valley High School and opted instead to obtain her GED. Naya joined other South Carolina students in a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the state's laws against disturbing schools, which are overly broad and apply disproportionately to Black students. Together, Naya and Vivian, along with other young women and girls, work to raise awareness about the school to prison pipelines and its impact on all students, but especially Black girls. Also joining us, Alexa Harmon Thomas. Alexa is the campaign coordinator for Represent Justice, an organization that uses the power of media to engage audiences in reimagining the justice system and creating real demand for change. Prior to Represent Justice, she served as a digital manager and strategist for the Work with the Coach, a leading digital media company that represents and advises industry-leading artists and companies. Alexa earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and a Bachelor of Arts in African American Studies from the University of Southern California. During her time at USC, Alexa was a member of the women's track and field team. And AAPF's very own Chandrea Murphy Washington is an Arkansas-based youth development activist. She is a graduate of the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where she received a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and a certification in nonprofit management. She received her Master of Public Service from the Clinton School of Public Service, where her work focused on the career and social emotional development of African American youth in the Central Arkansas region. She serves AAPF as a program coordinator and will be joining me as a discussant during today's conversation. So welcome to all of you. And I'm just going to jump right in. This was a hard film to watch. As we witnessed events unfold in the classroom that day, most of the communication took place between the Black male classroom teacher and the white male school resource officer. For me, heteropatriarchy is on clear display. We see two men, one Black and one white, basically deciding the fate and the future of these two Black students. This gendered conversation that they have, verbal and nonverbal, and decisions that they make undoubtedly escalated the situation. Their lack of care and humanity ultimately led to Shakara being violently thrown, slammed from her desk, and dragged like a rag doll on full display. Naya, can you share what you were thinking when you made the decision to record Officer Benfields on that day?
Hey, everybody. Yes, so we can just jump right into. First, I want to say I'm so grateful to be here, first of all. Yes, that day, I was thinking more of like let's get proof. He's not going to get away with this, because it's always been known that he had this nickname Officer Slim, and it was just like word of mouth. Nobody ever saw anything, was ever able to like witness anything. So it was kind of like a moment of like, oh no, he's not going to get away with this, like not in front of me personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Naya, just jump right into it. So for me, that was a unnerving scene, but you had the courage. You had the courage to not only take out your phone and film it, but you continue to film. So as a Black girl in the classroom on that day, and again, we keep taking you back to that day, which we're going to talk about, right? What is that like for you? But on that particular day, what could have been done differently? And I mean by the teacher, the vice principal, the officer, what do you think could have been done differently?
Honestly, to avoid everything, when she asked to go to her support teacher, I feel like, that should have been it. That would have been the end of the whole situation. He violated her IEP by not allowing her to go with the teacher that day. And I just feel like, if he would have just let her go when she needed that support in that moment, then none of this would have happened at all. That's the main thing that could have been different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we witnessed here, this entire interaction between this child, this teenage girl, and this adult male military trained officer, I believe, definitely police trained.
Wait, don't forget the weightlifting, because he did that.
Yes, he's a bodybuilder. He's a professional bodybuilder, weightlifter. You're right. So this is somebody who's not only trained to use force, but also trained to use restraints and to use his muscularity, right, as a weapon or a defense. So it was dehumanizing. It was dehumanizing to see Shakara, slammed, then dragged in that moment. And it speaks more to his lack of humanity and care. So what does care look like in Black girls schooling? What would that support look like?
For me, when I was in school, it would have looked like more Black faces around me, more Black women specifically. We always had to turn to a white man, a white woman, or a Black man. It just would have been a lot more easier to go through school with somebody who looked like me that I could go to.
Mm-hmm. So having someone caring looks like having people who look like you to be present with you throughout your schooling experience.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so Vivian, now that we asked the Black girls, what is it like to be a Black girl student in non-caring classrooms? The question I have for you, because I empathize with you too, right? So I've been a Black girl, and I had to sit with being a Black girl, and I can empathize with being a Black girl who's being harmed. And I remember while watching you, Vivian, in the film, I felt like you were showing some kind of restraint, and that was like emotional restraint. And we've been seeing a lot of that this week or the last 2 weeks. And so we witnessed the scene between Shakara and the school resource officer from different perspectives. And, even for me as a scholar, even from different analytical points of view. I watched the film as a Black girl, woman, mother, school social worker, clinician, Black girl advocate, and I felt some unease. Vivian, I wonder, how do we protect ourselves from becoming desensitized to violence against Black girls?
Hello. So thank you for having me. And I'm just I'm be totally transparent about who I am. So right now, what I see on my screen is me and Ben, and I actually don't want to see him. So I'm like a little jarred and triggered. Thank you. Because I want to just be with y'all. So one of the things, restraint. But I knew it was bigger than me, right? And as I keep moving, I have to keep remembering it's bigger than me, it's a greater whole. So I need you to repeat your question because I was a little triggered by seeing him.
Okay, the truth is I was nervous when asking the question because I was triggered with seeing you two together. So the question is, how do we protect ourselves, right? So how do we protect ourselves, and certainly how do we protect Black girls and make sure that they're not becoming desensitized to public violence against Black girls or private violence, but certainly these types of violence where it's always in our face through documentaries, social media, etc.
Yeah, so one of the things, like for me, my protection looks like reaching out to you or not being afraid. And that's what I teach the girls, like, don't be afraid to say, I'm having this moment. Because one of the things is the more you're seeing, the more you think you have to perform. So one of the things in protection is we don't have to perform. We get to show up in our full vulnerability, our authenticity, and say, hey, this don't, like what I just did. That's how girls get to have it, and having them have the space to do it. Because how many times, like, Nadia may have been uncomfortable, but she may have not known that she could say that picture don't work for me. I like it when I see all the faces, all these, I like it when I see all the faces, and constantly asking, what do you need? Versus, I'm here and here's what I can do for you. How can you do something for me? You don't even know what I need. How can you do something for me and you haven't even asked me what I needed? So you're putting your stuff on the table, or you bringing your stuff to it. And so the protection, I haven't become desensitized, because in the midst of all this, I still rock with Black girls, and they'll check me in a minute. They'll be like, okay, this is nice. I'm sorry if I sound a little tired. I just ended a 2-day conference. We did our Every Black Girl Turn the Ships Around conference, and our conference is centered around the thought, if the ships never landed on the African shores, if these Black bodies, if girls actually understood their bodies as a shore, what ships don't get to land? What do we want? So I'm constantly like, what do y'all want? What do y'all want? Not what you don't want. What do you want? What do you want? And I think that's why I don't become desensitized, because I don't actually, like I said, you heard it 1,200 times. I came on towards the end and I'm like, oh, I did say that, right? Ben ain't my point. I don't become desensitized, because when I do that, that means I'm not looking at Black girls anymore. I'm only looking at Black girls. So it's one of those things where as much as I can engage with Black girls and have them speak, even if I have to create spaces, keep creating spaces keeps me from being desensitized. But like I said, Dr. V, we go back, right? I can call you up. You call me like, I'm like, oh, I'm texting you in the middle of the night. You call me the next day, say, I missed your call, but you call me back.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I can keep myself. Here's what healing looks like for me. Can you hold me so I can hold these girls? And teaching the girls the same thing. And I don't know if I answered your question fully, but that's what it looks like for us to continue this work, understanding like, y'all, I'm tired today. I really am. I just spent 2 full days doing a full conference. And I'm gonna keep showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to keep leaning on folks like APF, but Dr. V, you didn't answer the call so many times this week, and I'm pulling at you about this because I didn't realize how many times those 2-minute conversations kept me going. It ain't gotta be, let's go to the spa, let's do all this. It's like, hey, I missed your call, I'm checking in, you good? And I'm like, oh, I'm good right now. But it gave me something. And that is what I think happens with girls as well. Just check in. And so as far as how do I stop being desensitized and how do we how do we prevent ourselves from being desensitized? Acknowledge that it exists and that you're ready to stop so somebody can give you that pour into that you need to keep going. And I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you certainly answered my question. And I heard you say, thank you for showing up. And we have to keep showing up for each other so that we can do the work, because we aren't, and we probably won't have the privilege of ever being desensitized. That's a part of the work, right? And so, Alexa, I do have a question for you. As someone here talking about justice, right? Representing justice from a popular media perspective, a social media perspective, and as a form of digital activism. Can you speak to how we can protect Black girls and other young people and Black people in general from becoming desensitized to this type of violence, and how we can use it as a form of activism or agency?
Definitely. I think that one of the most important things is letting our Black girls and boys know that this type of violence is not okay. It shouldn't be normal. Acknowledging that it's important to separate yourself and not consume that type of media. And when you do, make time for self-care practices, talk to other people. In my work on the campaign so far, talking with young people, a lot of them haven't recognized that they're desensitized. They just have seen these clips so many times. They've seen their friends go through it. They don't think they're taking on any trauma through watching these things. So that's something that's important there. But also being able to use films like this as a tool for those organizing around the movement to bring people proximate to the issue that might not be. Hosting screenings with school board members, parent-teacher associations, different groups that this isn't their reality or their everyday experience, and using this type of media to engage them to make change is important.
So using media, this type of media in particular, right? This media, this film, it is text, right? Mm-hmm. It is documenting our humanity, so to speak, right? It gives us a reason and a tool to fight back. So thank you, Alexa. Thank you, Vivian and Naya. So Chandrea, are there any questions or thoughts from the community or our youth activists who are in the chat?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Venus. During the film screening, or first off, we had a really good conversation going during the film screening where a few people pointed out how there was a law created that would criminalize incidents within the school instead of paying attention to the mental health issues or other factors that could contribute to a student's behavior. And from this conversation, like we have some people commenting on how the teacher escalated the situation by failing to address her IEP, which is a federal law, like something that these students are supposed to be federally protected against those types of violations. And we also had major support from Vivian, including like that particular quote where she stated, how can you do something for me when you haven't even asked what I've needed? So just a lot of people really tuning in on basically how these institutions are failing to protect these girls. And I'll turn that back over to you.
Thank you, Chandrea. Thank you. And I look forward to hearing from you too about how parents are grappling with these same discussions. So if we go back to the film, the events that day at Spring Valley High play into race and gender stereotypes, as well as master narratives that perpetuate the criminalization of Black girls in schools. In this film, we witness anti-Black racism, sexism, and adultism, all factors that reinforced historicized scripts through which Shakara's body and actions or inactions were read in the classroom that day. Black girls are framed as problematic and adult-like. And thus, Black girls are seldomly ever viewed as probable victims of violence. So here too, though, Vivian, can we add to this discussion? Can we talk about the ways in which schools fail to protect Black girls attending school with a disability, or protect Black girls living with an invisible disability? Why are these girls so easy to abuse and to mistreat and to fail to stand up and protect?
I really wish Janae Davis was on this call, right? The woman, the historian who did this work, because I think her words spoke it all. The history. So there is not a failure to protect them. There's an acknowledgement we have to make that they were never supposed to be protected. I think about the movies like Roots, and like I think about things, well, who gets to have, you're about to walk over, I'm thinking about Sojourner Truth now and all these other folks. Who gets, it's a mud puddle, but who gets to walk across it? Black girls have never had any value. When we think about enslavement, when we think about Black girls in this American context, right? When we talk about Black girls, we have to talk about the fact that until you can start being a childbirthing age, or, you know, our physical bodies can actually be birthing, and are you going to birth somebody that can work these fields? And, or are you going to be like this playmate for the masses child, right? Until we can actually grapple with that, we're not having real conversations. So the things that can happen is because historically, Black girls have only been rag dolls. And I love the way you said that. She was thrown across the room like a rag doll, because I'm done with that now. I want the Tucker toy now. I want this toy now. I want this toy now. I want this toy now. But this is a real human being. Black girls, until we can create capital for somebody else, we're not seeing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is what Professor Kimberly Crenshaw refers to as intersectional failures. So we see that Shakara is not protected as a Black student, as a Black girl student, or as a girl who actually has an IEP that's not being recognized, right? And so this is a part of a larger national pattern that plays into the criminalization and mass incarceration of our Black girls. So Anaya, I want to pivot back to you to piggyback on what Vivian has stated about these failures and who's deserving of protection and who's being thrown away when we're done with them. Naya, how is the experience of school or schooling itself has changed by the fact that instead of being supported and cared for, many of our girls feel like they're being monitored and disciplined constantly? And I don't even want to use the word discipline because in my field, there's a difference between discipline and punishment. Our girls are being punished constantly for things that other girls are not subjected to. So Naya, how does that play out in the school building, this monitoring of the Black girl body and disposition?
I was on mute, I'm sorry. But I said, well, you know, I've been out of school for quite some time now. No, but for me in school, it was really the dress code. It was crazy going to my school. That's when I, like, those cranks kind of started turning in my head, like, oh, that's a little telling. You know, I'm getting in trouble for leggings and these white girls are walking around here in Sophies and the Nike running shorts. You know, I can see half of their butt cheek, but I gotta go in here and put on scrubs and mess up my outfit for the rest of the day, you know? So that was really telling for me. It's at Spring Valley specifically.
I think you referred to them as the booty shorts.
The booty shorts.
Yes, but thank you for being so candid. And Vivian, another question. So Shakara did have an IEP, because I really do want to emphasize this. Who rights were violated? You know, not just physically, but also from a school standpoint, right? We got federal laws protecting that IEP. Can you and Naya please speak to both the relationship between school push out and stereotypes of Black girls who are deemed unfit for schooling, because I think that's what Naya is hinting at too, about how we dress and policing how our Black girls are dressing in school compared to other girls.
So I'll start, and then Naya, please, because I love when Naya talks. I just stop and listen, right? One of the things that is very hyper in my head right now is that we got two laws happening at one time. Who gets precedence? So let's be very clear. There's a disturbance schools law that's happening. That's how Ben Phillips can come in. Her IEP was violated, but which law takes precedence? And who gets to choose it? Because I'm not sure, and I may have misheard, but let's be very clear. There were 3 men in that room at the time. And Naya, I need you to chime in if I'm wrong. There was a white male teacher who called in a Black male administrator, who called in he called in a resource officer. And we ain't even gonna talk about that. There were 2 resource officers in the school. The white male showed up because the Black male resource officer, who knows where he was, but he's also under charges of sexual assault against girls in school. So there's a lot to unpack, but I'm gonna stay with this conversation. So that law took precedence. How do we protect policing? Took precedence over how do we protect a child? Anytime you have policing in schools, policing is always going to take precedence. That's why we're police-free schools, because they didn't see it as that he did anything against her. Mm-hmm. He's like, she's not abiding to my rules. Once I call a police officer in, the way the system is set up, once a police officer is called in, the school just falls back. They cannot do anything. So her IEP made it didn't matter. Ben didn't have the knowledge. Let's be very clear. There was no understanding, like Naya said, she asked had you let her leave or do what she wanted with the IEP request, we wouldn't even be here. We gonna always go back to if she put down her cell phone. I want to bring it to face front. Thank you, Naya, because you got me stirred up right now. Had he acknowledged her and what she needed, we wouldn't even be here. Not her taking away her phone and all this other stuff. Had he said, "You're right, that's your right," but you never saw her as a Black girl with a right. And so policing took first that law. And we have to be very clear, there's a difference between policies and laws. And so some people think, you just send them home or you send them to detention or whatever. No, you call police in the classroom, they are automatically going to be a part of a system now. And we have to address that. So you got 2 different systems in a school system. And which law gets, which system gets to hold it all? Principals don't even decide. They have no choice in what officers come into their school. So we're not even looking at educating. We're looking at policing in schools. And if schools are a place of policing, yes, her IEP will never be acknowledged. And it will never, she as a human being will never be acknowledged, especially when we put race and gender into it. That's why Naya got arrested, because Naya deal with the other kids. So you can say, Naya made everybody do this. No, half the filming that we saw was not Naya, because Naya was like, wait a minute, I'm trying to stop this. Other kids were filming. That's how we got so much footage. Let's be clear. None of them got arrested, but Naya did, because once again, Naya challenged the policing system. She didn't challenge education. She challenged this policing system. And they was like, no, Black girl, you won't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Vivian, you bring up 2 points. And as a former professor who did prepare pre-service teachers, as you know, I did, I never could understand how the special education teaching force never stood up to protect Black girls or Black children in general with IEPs. It was almost like they were missing a racial lens to their advocacy for kids who have a disability or who are undiagnosed with a disability or underdiagnosed with a disability. So you're talking about that intersectionality or that those multiple identities that impact Black girls differently. And also, so which policy trumps which policy in our schools, and it's almost the policing.
What's the trump, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, and then, and Naya, I have to admit this, okay, Naya, and I'm like Vivian here. We love when you speak. Naya, do you know I refer to you as the hidden figure in this whole conversation? You are holding a piece of technology that can shift the dialogue about the victimization and dehumanization of Black girls in our schools. You are the hidden figure in this narrative. Naya, there's a racial element to this, but also a gendered element, as Ms. Vivian pointed out. These dress codes policies are probably not pushed on boys in the same way. And in some ways, these experiences are shared between Black girls and Black girls, certainly, and some are different to Black girls. Now, we saw such a moving discussion about mental health in the video too. Mentally, what does this do to Black girls in schools?
I can just speak from my personal experience and how it mentally affected me. It made me scared to, at first I didn't really like authority figures. And then I got scared of authority figures because I was like, well, goodness, that one thing I said landed me in a jail cell that same day, and just the thought that they had so much power really brought me so much fear, never ever wanting to go back to school, never wanting to sit in another classroom, that type of thing. I tell people all the time, I still have never talked through that trauma with somebody. I'm 24 now. So, I really don't even know how to move on from it. You get what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying, Naya. I do get what you're saying. And the truth is, I don't even have the right transition for you, Naya. You're our hidden figure. Let's sit with that. And I commend you for your courage. And despite having to face this, you were motivated, by the way, to take up this case, right? You were motivated to take this up in the legal case. What did you hope to achieve, Nia? How does it relate to, Naya, to your healing, to your fortitude, your resilience, sis?
You're talking about the ACLU case, right?
Yes.
Okay. I don't even know. I gotta be 1,000% honest and say, when that case started, I was 19, 20. I didn't even know what I was doing, but just being a yes, because all I kept hearing was, it's going to help Black students. It's going to help Black students in South Carolina. And I was like, well, yes. It's a yes.
And I think that's worthwhile, Naya. And I'm just going to let you know, I definitely feel your emotions. And I think acknowledging your emotions in this moment, that's a part of us protecting girls and young women like yourselves from desensitization. I respect that. You did what you did in the moment, and just to educate, because we got a lot of young people right now who are a part of this community conversation. I want you to know that your agency and your courage is exactly what's contributing to your resiliency. Okay, and so we won't forget that.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes.
I also want Naya. I love Naya. Know how much I love her. Don't cry. I'm not gonna cry. I promise I won't cry. So I know how we do. We also get to say, because one of the things that's come up for me, Naya stood, but I also remember that girl who sat in the desk behind Shakara. It don't look a certain kind of way, Naya. In this moment, what you just did and what you're doing, every time you show up for a panel, you have access to deal with your trauma. And also, we also get to acknowledge you, and we get to like not keep pulling from you. I love you for always showing up. But if you don't want to show up to a panel, because this was a difficult film to watch, imagine living it. We don't even know. And so there are times where you're like, I'm here because I want to be a yes. It's okay when you're like, I can't show up for a panel because you're being a yes for you. Your no to a panel is the yes that we want every Black girl to always experience. You got me?
I do.
So one of the things is that you said, I haven't even talked to anybody about my trauma, but you are talking it. So it looks different ways. You may not sit in a therapist's office or whatever, but every time you show up, it can be that. But if you need more, my request in this moment, because you brought it up, and that's the reason I'm speaking it. And my spirit, my wound spirit, that's what I call her, won't let her leave it. Whatever you need, make your request. Make your request and we got you. And if you even don't know what that looks like, and I'm saying this, and I'm not just talking to Naya, I'm talking to somebody else who's working with somebody else or a child that's on this call. I'm talking to somebody else. Make your request. I don't know what it means to be Naya Kinney. I didn't live your experience. I'm gonna support you for life, but I can never say I was the child and all of a sudden I'm on a world stage. Before I even figured out what childhood looked like, I'm thrown in adulthood and activism and all these things. And I just want to show up for everybody. I want to do what's right, because kids always want to do what's right. If you need to say no, say no. Because you take Shakara. Shakara took your lead. You take her lead right now. Shakara will say no. Shakara ain't on this call because she like, listen, I need a moment. It's okay if you take your moment. And I'm sorry, it was
no need to apologize.
I had to speak it.
No need to apologize. Again, I appreciate you both, Naya and Vivian. It takes courage, and you have the right to rest and to restore. Rest and restore.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna take a deep breath, and I'm gonna move on to Alexa.
Let's all of us take a deep breath. Woo.
Thank you, Naya. Alexa, what are the ways in which organizing and organizers can respond to this? So what sort of communities should be created to begin to push back against these racist and sexist treatments of Black girls? Tell us more about Represent Justice and your organization's vision for how we can address this issue.
So at Represent Justice, we use stories to create action. So our focus is on centering the voices of those who are impacted. And we recognize that those who are most impacted or closest to the issue are closest to the solutions. So letting those people lead with what they need and how others can support them. And so in this instance, it's how are we getting our communities involved in schools, in creating policies and holding people accountable and instituting transformative justice into our schools, teaching conflict resolution in our schools, and just getting more, like Naya said, seeing more people like her in her school that she can go to, that she can trust, and just pouring care into our young people. Because from all of the stories and all of our ambassadors that we work with, the main thing is if they received that care when they were a young person, had those people to care for them, had those interventions, their life could have looked a lot different. So making sure that we're pouring into our young people instead of punishing them, and that being our first thought when we interact with them.
I love it. So a focus on transformative justice and pouring into our young people, not simply focusing on how do we punish them better, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Alexa. And also, Alexa team will put more information in the chat about restorative justice and this type of activism that centers youth and Black girls in particular. Chandrea, let's take a second for any comments or thoughts from the AAPF community.
Yes, thank you again, Dr. Venus. There are a lot of people in the chat holding space for Naya and just sending her all the love and healing and requests to reclaim her time, rest, and restoration, and just to use her voice. We also, one of the things that continue to come up in the chat is how in incidents like this, it kind of feels like a constant uphill battle to humanize Black girls when they are in the midst of these events that sometimes feel like a public lynching. One viewer mentioned that a way that we can help to usher Black girls through this trauma is by creating these types of spaces for Black girls and Black women to come together to lean on one another and starting to ask Black girls what they need from one another and from us. And an invitation like that gives room to empower their voice and agency through their healing and facilitates their healing. Some other interesting points that came up, one viewer mentioned how the classroom trauma is a part of the control that policing in this form accomplishes. So it desensitized the males in the classroom who in this viewer's time would have intervened more than just verbally to come to the aid of their sisters. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Chandrea. And thank you to our audience, our community participants. Again, we're here. We have a lot of young people in the audience. We have a lot of youth organizers and activists. We also have a lot of educators, I see. And so, again, Vivian, back to you. This is really important. This is a contemporary question. I know that Alexa, she spoke about transformative justice. Can you talk more about your vision of restorative justice? What would that look like and feel like? And what is the difficulties in doing that, which led you to these, this difficult conversation with the school resource officer, Fields?
Yeah, with restorative justice, I think it's a lot of layers with that because I had to grapple with it, right? What are we restoring them to? Mm-hmm. And then transformative is also like what we want them to transform to. So there's a lot of things that's happening in one conversation. So with restorative justice, my goal is to work with to work with the kids. I actually have to work with the educators and everybody else. What was the trauma that you didn't heal? How can I restore you? Because one of the things, I have a strong belief, and my womb spirit is talking. I'm tired, y'all. I'm being honest. 2 days, I'm being very honest, and my thoughts can be over the top or all over the place, but I'm really want y'all to go somewhere with me. What are we restoring them to? Mm-hmm. I want to work with educators because I don't believe any educator came into that classroom to harm a child. But what was lost in them that they can't even see a child because they have all these things pushing down on them and they just pushing it out. So I got to leave myself. Restorative justice means nobody gets to be left out. Mm-hmm. We believe we want to create a world where every Black girl thrives. In order that to happen, the world around her has to thrive. So as educators, you have so many thoughts in your head. I know how to work with my kids. And then all of a sudden they say, you can only do A, B, or C. That's a toll. And until we can address that toll, we can't address the kids. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the intersectionality, that's why I love Kimberly. Hey, Kim, I love you. We have to address that. the intersectionality of it all, because at the same time, men and boys don't have to have this conversation all day. Because we're trying to fix ourselves to become what the world has created. And the world that we live in, this America, was designed for men and boys. And we got to fix ourselves. So now we got to figure out, how do I become them versus you wouldn't even be here without me. And I might have went all off tangent, but I know my words.
I know you did. You speaking my language now.
My words are intentional.
With heteropatriarchy. That's what we started with. And I hear you also saying one of my favorite focuses, even.
And let's be very clear. And I'm not dragging anybody. I'm really not dragging anybody. Let me be very clear about that. And Naya spoke it. There was a woman that was supposed to be called into that classroom that never showed up. So how are we conditioned? How are we conditioned in the educational system that we gonna keep falling in line and we want to keep our paychecks? And I get all that. My sister is an educator and she got 3 jobs. My sister is an educator and she got 3 jobs to support herself. So as an educator, are we supporting the educators because they want to educate? They want that to be their one job. And I might be taking this to all because it really is so many layers. It's hard to keep us confined to one because we're a part of all of it, but they want to keep leaving us out. And we're like, nah, we're not doing this.
Yeah, you're right. I was going to say, so Vivian, what you're talking about, what you're describing is what I refer to as collective healing. In order for Black girls to thrive, we need collective healing. We can't just keep stopping and starting with the students. We have to start with educational administrators, teachers, even community, nonprofit community organization providers, all of us. The U.S. is a violent culture.
And we got to acknowledge it.
And we have to acknowledge it in order to address.
I know, I'm sorry to cut you off. Because the other thing I also know, let's be very clear, and this is just me, I'm going to talk for me, but I know APF does a strong job of doing this. The reason critical race theory is being challenged, because you're challenging Black women and girls. Let's be very clear about some stuff. Because if they have that curriculum come in and it's trueness, you got to acknowledge Black women and girls. You're not just talking about African and African American history, or, oh, we're talking about this and that. You want to keep silent and stuff. It's a different level of genocide. And I'm going to stop talking because that's a whole different conversation that I would love to be on the phone with somebody about, or we can do a whole different panel about, but that's a different level of genocide. If I can stop these girls, if I can stop this curriculum from happening, I can still dismantle and genocide a whole people. It looks different in so many ways. Violence comes from word, comes from hearing, comes from thought, it comes from speaking, it comes from feeling. Violence is not just a physical thing, it's a social, emotional thing, it's a mental thing, it's a heart thing. Violence happens in so many ways, and the way they're creating violence for us now, stop critical race theory. They're gonna keep shutting Kimberly down. She introduced intersectionality. They shut her down. But
and to address these intersectional failures, we need racial justice policies that study these issues or understand these issues from an intersectional lens. And so, yeah, you're on point, Vivian, and I'm glad that we get to have this conversation before community, the interrelatedness of all of these conversations. And Chandrea, because Vivian brought this up, let's talk. I need you to switch your hat right now. And I'm being mindful of time because I know our audience has more questions. We have to talk with our sons about the dangers of racism and the unjust treatment that they may suffer because of it. We talk to them about how to de-escalate encounters with law enforcement. And in many ways, we are having the same conversation with our girls and the ways in which we need to think about the brutalization and push out of Black girls from the school system as a kind of racial femicide. Now, reflecting on your own girlhood, what kinds of messages or talks did you have with your parents about the police and policing? And how might these conversations change or evolve between you and your daughter, given the increased police or public awareness about Black girls' needs for protection from the police and white vigilantes?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, when I reflect back on my girlhood, for one, I was a caregiver to my parents. So there were a lot of conversations about preparation and navigating different intersectional barriers that I didn't get to have with my parents growing up. And also, my great grandfather was the first African American police chief in Little Rock, Arkansas, or not in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And like that, like because of that narrative, my family never really had like a bad perception of police because we had one person in our family who was a police officer. And so my upbringing was skewed when it came to how police treat Black people, because in my experience, I didn't see all of the brutalization and everything until we started getting police into our schools after September 11th. And that's when in Arkansas, school resource officers and everything like that started to become a big deal. And so again, like I just missed out on the opportunity to have those types of conversations with my family. And so when I got older and got interested in youth development, and this was after I had my own daughter, when I started to see all of the barriers that our Black youth were facing here in Arkansas that were directly linked to systemic racism, I then took it upon myself to start figuring out what are the things that I need to start teaching my daughter. How do I have these conversations with her? My daughter is 10 years old and 5'4". So she is, there are definitely barriers that she is going to have to face as she gets older and goes higher into the school district. I mean, her first day of school this year in the 5th grade, they were trying to send her over to the middle school because they thought she was in the wrong building. And there are often times where there's obvious racial tension between students in the class, where my daughter and her friends will be the ones to experience the brunt of the punishment or the discipline that's going on. And so because I'm aware of that, I have to constantly have conversations with her about how even her stature is going to cause people to treat her as she's an adult, or as she's not worth the protection of the little girl that she is. And constantly finding materials to show her, or of course child appropriate, because I don't want to traumatize my 10-year-old. I don't want to desensitize her to all of the things that they're having to face. And so being in spaces like this give me the tools and resources that I need to continue to have these transformative conversations with my child and protect her.
Thank you, Chandrea, for sharing parts of your story. For you, what do you believe are the different ways parents can advocate for their children?
I think that first of all, you have to center your child's mental health. And as you're centering your child's mental health, that's going to want to make you step up, because every time your child is like thrown off or something's going on with your child mentally, you're going to want to step up and address that. And so that's going to mean being present and vocal when it comes to showing up at your child's school. If you are aware that there's racial tension going on, if you are aware that your kids or kids that look like your Black children are being disproportionately punished, you have to step up and you have to speak up and make your presence and your voice heard within those schools, because they're not going to want to continue to keep having a problem from a vocal parent. So being able to do that, and then making sure you teach your child like how to advocate for themselves, what their rights are in school, you know, like if they have an IEP, having your child knowing that they have rights, because a child that knows that they have rights is a threat in and of itself to people, because they aren't able to use that same information or a lack of attention to detail with those students. So preparing your child for the barriers that they're going to face and being present all the time and letting them know that you're not just going to take a backseat to this.
Very good, Chandra. And I'm hoping that some of our parents and parent advocates can use the chat to also share some different ways that, or tips that they also use for advocating for their own child or other students for that matter. Alexa, what would you like
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Here we go. Also, thank you, Chandra. Chandra, I'm saying your name right. So I have to be very clear with y'all. I grew up with a speech impediment. So when I'm apologizing, it's because I hear something and it goes back to IEPs and stuff. I hear something in my way. And then I think I'm saying what y'all saying. And I think that happens with our young people. I think I'm saying what y'all saying, but so I'm always asking again, am I saying it right? Like people thought I was from another country or whatever. I've had a speech impediment all my life. And so my words, I still can't say how y'all do PUPL, like it's public to me. Y'all say PUPLIC. And I think that's important to like acknowledge those spaces because I don't want anybody to think I'm up on this stage, I'm doing this thing. I'm not in performance. I'm really saying, here's who I am. But I wanted to add to what that conversation, because I also want to acknowledge parents who don't know because nobody was with them. Some parents have the privilege of having that space. Some parents don't. And then we punish kids for the spaces that their parents didn't have. So I wanted to bring that in the conversation as well. And thank you so much. She said, hey, this was what's happening. And when I tell you, you're in Arkansas, I got family in Arkansas, and we had a Bill Clinton from Arkansas, we had a Maya Angelou. And so there's a lot of things that are still carried on the backs of y'all. They're saying, well, if you're from Arkansas, Maya Angelou became this, you should be able to do it. It's some stuff where as we talk about this world conversation, all the conversations before us that we're supposed to hold, but nobody ever saw us. They want us to be the other. They want us to be everybody else that came before us, but they're not seeing us, the me of it all. And that comes up for me a lot. And it came up for me when I'm watching you, and thank you. I know you're holding two spaces right now. You're like, I got to do this for AAPF, but I'm also a mom. But I'm also a cousin, a mom, not just a mom, I'm a sister. And I know what's happening with other folks. I got some privilege, but Arkansas is on the map in a whole different level. The political realm, we get in the middle of primaries, and I know we got to go. We're over time. I get that. But that's another thing. I'm going to stop apologizing for time when we got a whole bill in the Congress or wherever it is. They say we're going to have daylight saving times, and we can, like, if we control time, we control time. And right now, Black women and girls, if you stay on this call, jump off, don't jump off. But we get to have this conversation. We making room. We all here. Are you ready to spend time with us? You can go to a concert and they're going to do another set because you want another song. You want another word because the women on this call, they're giving you a word. Be ready to hear the word. And the only reason I'm jumping on it off is because we also have to acknowledge we live in this moment in time, a virtual world, and it's a lot of stuff happening in my house. So I'm still present, but sometimes everybody in my house don't want to be on camera. So that's why I'm jumping on and off.
Yes, thank you, Vivian, for reclaiming our time. Alexa, what would you like to leave our audience with about what can be done and how people can support Black girls in schools?
I think that what I'd like to leave people with is in conversations about policing in schools and ultimately safety in schools, that safe environments can't be constructed without the input of those who are impacted. So all of our conversations need to include our young people and really understanding what makes them feel safe. And it's not police in schools, it's resources, it's time, it's care, and attention.
Thank you, Alexa. Yes. And that's what we do at AAPF with our Young Scholars program. So there goes that plug, where we center the experiences and research of Black girls to continue to have them as a part of the conversation about our policies, national, state, and local. Vivian, if you're still there, I know that you've been involved with some of the ongoing organizing campaigns across the nation for police-free schools. Can you explain the organizing vision for police-free schools?
So one of the things, thank you, because this is going to be a whole nother thing. Police-free schools, it's been, it's removing police officers themselves, but I'm not going to say but, and there's another conversation we have to have. This moment with Shakara happened because there was policing in schools. How do adults police? And how have we, so our campaign with, the national campaign for police-free schools is removes the officers, but it's also to have adults understand how they're policing children as well. How are they doing everything? So our long-term goal is to reclaim and acknowledge it's not charter schools and all that things, because I'm looking to build a boarding school, right, for girls. I am. And it's not that I'm taking away from the public school system, but until we can change this public school system, that's a part of, and I caught myself because I'm like, did they hear public or did they hear public? Because when I talk fast.
No, we hear you. We hear you.
Okay.
You talk fast, we hear fast. How about that?
Yeah, and I'm also being very honest that I have my own triggers, right? So the long-term goal is we have to actually look at dismantling this whole system of education. I want more Dr. V's in the room with my kids. I want more Kimberly Crenshaws in the room with my kids. But until we address that they think only one person can educate all the kids, I'll never forget, we were, and Naya, I think you remember this, we did a weekend program and the kids said their white teacher told them, you should be grateful for me because we know it's hard to educate Black kids. The educators on the call right now, how many times do you think kids should be grateful that you in the room? I don't care if you're Black, white, I don't care. How many times you y'all should just be listening to me because I got so much to give. Are you willing to be a teacher? Are you willing to be a student as you're a teacher in a classroom? That's what police-free schools look like to me. We're not going to just remove police. We're going to remove policing, because policing looks a lot of ways. Because we can remove policing from schools, don't mean a teacher can call that little girl, that 5-year-old in Florida, they had to drive and come get her. They called the police on that child. How do we remove policing from schools? And how do we create liberatory freedom schools where kids get to just be? And not be hey, I ain't saying let kids run amok. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, how can we learn okay, this child is the only one in the room acting up. What if they not acting up and they telling us, I just don't learn this way? How open are we? And that's what I'm my goal is to work with educators, to work with administrators, to work with everybody to say, how do we see kids? Because if they are what's next, how are we preparing them now? And Dr. V, you do such a good job of it. And I told you the other night, and this is one of those private moments, I was so grateful for her because I'm I don't have all these words. I don't even know how to talk. And she always makes me feel safe. I'm talking the way I'm talking because she already made me feel safe to come on this call. That's what our kids need.
Ashe. Our kids need to feel safe. I want our community to ponder, how can we do a better job of helping all of our youth, young people, and children, especially our Black girls, feel safe inside and outside of schools? I would like to thank my panelists for coming and being so vulnerable and honest with all of us today. Vivian, Naya, Alexa, and Chandrea. Your candor and willingness to be a part of this conversation will be critical in pushing back against how Black girls are dehumanized and mistreated in schools. We will continue to be in touch about resources and information about the ways in which you can learn more about this issue and continue to protect and nurture Black girls. Many thanks to my colleagues at the AAPF for the African American Policy Forum. We look forward to you joining us as our Her Dream Deferred program continues with the screening and talkback of the film Aftershock on the maternal mortality crisis plaguing Black women, which starts screening tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. For more information on this week's programming, please visit aapf.org/HDD. Again, that's aapf.org/HDD. And our social media channels on Twitter and Instagram at AA Policy Forum. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you can stay with us throughout the week as we continue to uplift the stories and status of Black women. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Thank you, Brianne. Thank you, Thea. Gratitude, Crystal. Merci beaucoup, Arlene.